After weeks of searching, you have found it. The cave. All this time, it's come down to this. You feel your pulse quicken as you enter the cave. And it takes you a moment just to realize how enormous this entrance is. Part of you wonders how you could have missed this. The silence of the woods around you seems odd, almost loud in how quiet it is, as you slightly hear the crunch, crunch, crunch of gravel under your feet as you walk into the cave, descending down, past where the light reaches into darkness. The silence pressing all around you, feeling your pulse quickening slowly, your breath getting more and more shallow as you smell a sulfurous smell in the air. And then you hear it, or feel it more as the walls of the cave around you begin to rumble with this rhythmic and you only wonder, what is it that could be that big to make the very cave shake around you? Hi there, I'm Dr. Megan Connell, and this is Psychology at the Table. In this episode, we're going to be continuing our discussion on how to bring emotional content into the game by talking about emotionally immersive experiences. So I've talked about how much of a fan I am of immersive experiences. I love getting into character and really getting into those moments of feeling what my character's feeling. And so what we're talking about with emotionally immersive experiences is how to give our players clues to how their characters might be feeling emotionally. Now, to do this well, we really need to understand how it is humans experience emotions. And to do that, we need to jump into a little bit of psychology. So our appraisal and understanding of emotions is based off of two factors. One of them being the unconscious physiological reactions that our body has to the world around us. These are things like our heart rate going up, our face flushing, our respiration rate changing, perspiring. Those are things that just happen and are beyond our conscious control. So for example, somebody you like walks into a room, your face is going to flush, your heart rate's going to go up, and you might start sweating. You're not deliberately thinking like, oh, there's that person I like, I need to start sweating profusely and having a hard time breathing. That just happens. Your body just does that. And that brings us to the second part of emotion, which is our interpretation and understanding of the environmental cues around us, taking those into consideration with the physiological responses. And so what we see really interprets what we feel. Let me give a couple examples of this. So if our body's reaction is to have a tightening in the chest, some difficulty breathing, and an increase in our heart rate, that could be interpreted as several different emotional experiences. So for example, if we had those three symptoms and we were confronted with a bear in front of us, well, we are interpreting that as fear, right? We see that as a threat, and so we are having a fear response. If we're getting ready to go on stage and to talk to some people, maybe that's excitement or nervousness. If, though, that person we like walked into the room and we're having that response, that could be more seen as desire or attraction. So it really depends on those two things. And now as a GM, what we get to do is we get to describe those physiological reactions without taking away our player agency. So we're not telling them what it is they're feeling, we're just saying what's going on in their body. So for example, if you want to communicate fear to your players, there's some really cool ways that you can do this. You know, I think a very go-to standard way would be to describe the thing that they're seeing, right? So if they're getting ready to confront a monster, we go into great detail in describing the monster, maybe how huge it is and how small they feel in comparison to it. But really going into those emotional cues can be a lot better, of saying, as your eye level comes to the kneecap of this thing, you feel your pulse quicken, your breath starts to catch in your throat as your eyes move up, up, up the body. You feel a sense of heaviness and as trembling starts to occur through your hands and through your body. We're not taking away the player agency there, but we are giving those physiological cues. And so maybe they know, like, okay, my character's probably scared right now. How do I overcome that fear? How do I stand tall? Or do I run away? Or do I start to strike a bargain because I'm afraid? What's cool too about physiological reactions is they are not conscious. So meaning, again, we don't have to think about them just to happen. And our body can pick up on things going on in our environment a lot better sometimes than we can. So think of this in terms of like a failed perception check. we can fail a perception check, yet still receive emotional information from a situation. Let me give a real life example of this. This actually happened to a family member of mine. They were out in the woods and they were gathering, I think, some little herbs and things to make a wreath for. And while they were out there, it was a beautiful day. They were having a great time, nothing out of the ordinary going on. All of a sudden, the hair on the back of their neck started standing up. They got this really creepy feeling, and they started feeling like they were in danger. And they left. They didn't know what was going on or why they felt that way. They left. Later, they were able to figure out that there was a coyote pack out there, and they had been surrounded by coyotes. So while this family member never saw the coyotes, they never got the perception check, right? They never saw that. Their body was still able to pick on the environmental cues that let them know that they were in danger. So that was probably things like, I would imagine, all the wildlife went quiet. They probably saw a little bit of movement out of the periphery of their vision, but not enough to really process exactly what it was they were seeing. And so their body communicated danger to them without telling them a direct thing of like, hey, you have to go do this. They just took those cues and then reacted based on that. So we can do things like that in our own games. So if some sort of creature is laying in wait to pounce on the characters, we might have them roll perception checks and they fail, so they don't see the creature, but it might be you do notice that it's very quiet here, and you're starting to get a prickling sensation on the back of your neck. These are things, again, that help put the players into the character state of mind without taking away their agency. It's a very delicate balance. We are really walking the line between overstepping our bounds and going into that thing where we're taking away their agency. But if you can do this well, it really creates an amazing emotional experience for your players. So a few common emotions and common physiological reactions that we have to different emotions are going to be the following. So if we're trying to broadcast that there's a threat or something to be slightly afraid of here, the heart rate's going to go up. You're going to get that tightness in your chest or tightness in your throat, have a hard time breathing, tingling along the spine, the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. And there also might be this perception that time is slowing down. Like you're being more aware of absolutely everything, like watching the drips of water as they fall instead of just seeing this blur of movement. If we want to ratchet that up into more of a terror or extreme danger, the heart's definitely racing a lot more. You might have a sinking feeling, trembling, difficulty breathing, feeling jumpy. Some problems with thinking or coming up with a coherent thought. Sweating, particularly sweating in the hands, can happen. There could also be just feelings of like weakness in your muscles and a desire to run. Doesn't say you have to run, but you just feel like there's just something in your body that wants you to run away. If, on the other hand, you're wanting to have the players feel excitement or joy at something, the heart's going to race again, but you're going to have that feeling of lightness, like butterflies in the stomach, bounciness, exuberant, like almost there's more energy than can be contained in your body. You're kind of bursting out. A very underutilized emotion, I think, is disgust. Disgust is great for when you are encountering undead. And so when we're experiencing disgust, a few of the things that are outside of our control would be like our facial expressions, like we're going to wrinkle our nose and kind of pull back. You can feel nauseous. You also would have a difficult time breathing, usually due to the smell. Problems focusing, again, the smell will be distracting to you. And you might actually gag as well. And so these are a few of the clues. And like, so with nausea, you don't need to tell the players like, oh, you feel like you need to retch. It's just sort of like, almost like you want to throw up. It's so gross. The player then can decide like, I'm going to make a con save to see if I do throw up. That's where we are keeping the player agency intact. We want them to decide how their character is going to take that information we give them and what they're going to do with it, how they interpret it, and how they move on. I think a couple of final pointers would be get as many of the senses involved as possible. The smell of the air, the feeling of the world around them, the sounds that they're hearing, the textures. The more we can describe those things and get people into that situation, as we are describing those physiological responses, they're going to take those environmental cues that we're also narrating and use that to inform their decision about how they're going to have their character feel. If you're doing this well, your players are going to go on a really interesting emotional journey as you play through your games. When you finish games where you do have a high emotional content, I really suggest checking with your players, making sure that they're okay, asking them if it was too much or if they're okay with it, and maybe even checking in again a couple days later after they've had some time to reflect and think about things. Anyway, I hope this was helpful to you, and as always, let's make space at the table for everyone.